Joining us now for Word Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, name and fellow.
Hi, my fellow. How are you doing? Good morning, Dr. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai.
We need to get our own fellowship because I'm feeling intimidated.
We've started to oppress them, Dr. What's happening?
My fellow.
We'll get there. We'll all have our own.
It's only in our rights news that you have, two distinguished fellows in journalism on the same table. Name and fellow, we will take from free fellow.
That's the essence of liberalism. Now you are seeing the essence of liberalism. You see Libra of fellows. You have fellows.
No, people should also develop themselves and acquire additional skills.
That's the essence.
The environment makes it possible for people to grow, not to stay in one spot and misbehaving.
My friends, there is absolutely no price for guessing what the number one story coming out from the weekend into the new week is, and that is first and foremost our chairman turning 65, of course.
Yes.
I know that you all did a great job of eulogizing him and talking about the great things about our chairman, because there are plenty. And as I agree with all of you, he has an eye for spotting talent. Mm-hmm. And it is just always a blessing to be in your presence and be here, a member of the Arise family, and to be able to celebrate our chairman. We had a great time over the weekend.
Yes, we did.
We watched the football as well. We'll get into that a bit later. But we did have a wonderful time celebrating his 65th birthday. So a huge birthday to you, Chairman. Moving on then to the news of the day, and that is obviously looking at the fallout in the aftermath of that assassination attempt on former President Trump. Off the back of that, President Joe Biden, he has called for political calm. He says that the temperature of politics has risen too high and is calling for unity and for both sides, for all sides, to really take a step back, unify, and understand that this, as important as politics is, it is just politics, and it shouldn't get to a point where people's lives are at stake. And I think that that's a lesson for everybody. Former President Trump too, to be very well aware of.
I like how you said that.
I know, it's definitely a learning curve for us all, but it's definitely something to dominate what is happening across the world. World leaders everywhere have shed light, condemned the attacks, sent their well wishes out to President Trump. And I do think that when we take another step into this new week, another step towards the Republican convention, which starts today in Milwaukee, former President Trump will be in attendance. I believe he has already arrived, though we have not seen him, but we do know that he is on ground. And it will be interesting to hear what he's going to say, because he did say that he has changed his speech now in light of what has happened over the weekend. So it will be interesting to hear whether or not he too will call for unity, whether there'll be a softening of the Donald Trump that we know, or whether or not he will use this to galvanize his presidential campaign. I do think that sometimes when people are on par when it comes to their competence, being able to lead, fame, all of these things, sometimes it's a very small determining factor that will sway things. And I do think that this assassination attempt has created so much of a stir, so much of a wave, that he may well ride this wave right back into the White House. So it will be very interesting to see what happens now, how people respond. One thing we were discussing yesterday is that I don't think that this will be a situation where we see people who are already committed to voting for the Democratic Party now switch ships to the Republican. I don't think we're going to see that. What we will see, I believe, is a changing in our voter turnout. Perhaps people who were verbally in support of Trump, but perhaps didn't care to get up and vote or get up to register. I do think you'll see those people come out in droves in support of Donald Trump. But let's not put the cart before the horse. There's still two major conventions that need to happen. As it stands, these are both presumptive nominees, but it does ring true that they will be the two people to emerge out of their respective conventions. And it will be interesting to see who Donald Trump picks as his running mate. I could speculate, but I will be keeping my eyes posted on who he chooses. Moving on later on today, Biden will be sitting down with NBC's Lester Holt. And again, that is also something that's going to change, because before the assassination attempt, this was going to be another instance where people could take a look at how Joe Biden is performing, how he's speaking, how he's being able to convince people that he does have the physical, the mental strength, the wherewithal to go up against Trump and win. But now that might be overshadowed now by the brightness of what has happened over the weekend.
I think that's not even happening anymore. They say they'd focus on the developing stories here, on Trump's developing story.
There we go. So there is just that. So those are the issues that we're seeing. As we said, Trump has already arrived in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. But yes, these are the situations that we're having.
This morning,
Yes.
I'll be paying tribute to the most sensible head in the room, or one of the most sensible head in the room this morning, which apparently is a former Victoria's Secret model, Melania Trump, the wife of the president.
Okay.
If you see the release by Melania Trump, I think that was one of the most sensible things I've seen in all of this heated politics going on in America. And I'll read some of her words, which were very, very, very unique. And I pay tribute to her this morning. I mean, after talking about the killing, she said, let's not forget that differing opinions, politics, and political games are inferior to love. Our personal, structural, and life commitment until death is at serious risk. Political concepts are simple when compared to us as human beings. We are all humans, and fundamentally and instinctively, we want to help one another. American politics is only one vehicle that we can uplift our community.
Right.
Love, compassion, and kindness and empathy are necessities. We have always had a unique union.
Sure.
America, the fabric of our gentle nation is tattered, but our courage and common sense must ascend and bring us back together as one.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So actually, he's having an interview with Lester Holt. It's the MSBC where he's not having yet this morning. So they're focusing. Yes, they're focusing on the elections. But for the Lester Holt interview, he'll be doing it from the White House. Yes, NBC. Yeah. He's going to be doing it from the White House. But a number of things have been said about this incident, and like you mentioned. It might just very well be that moment, that Damascus moment, as it were, for Donald Trump in terms of the line he's told with his campaign. It might really be softer. He's commended President Joe Biden's call and said that it was generous and kind of him to have called. So let's see there'll be a cooling of waters, and just to see that leaders would begin to take responsibility for the way in which that they conduct elections. I'm trying so hard not to speak about the reasons why the shooter would have taken out that action until we have enough. I think it's too sensitive to speculate, but it is important at this time more than ever to see that even in American politics can get dirty, and they're going back to the old days when we haven't seen this kind of shooting, especially for political candidates or presidential candidates or presidents themselves. So it's taking politics back in America, and that is really sad to see. But let's see what will happen in the next few days.
I think clearly it's a shocking and frightening moment for the American presidential race in 2024. President Trump, as I said earlier, has tried to make the occasion. He says, we will not fear. Now, part of the problem is that fear is being introduced into the equation in 2024. And the concern is that you could still have, possibly, more incidents of violence in this particular election, which is why I think it's important that world leaders from Australia to Canada to President Tinubu have all said that violence is incompatible with the democratic ethos. Now, President Trump acted in a statesman-like manner. He said, we will not fear, we will remain resilient in the face of wickedness, we will keep faith and all of that. And he said it was God alone that saved him. He used that opportunity to rally his base. But President Biden, in responding also, has called for unity, and he has shown that, look, we may disagree. Disagreement is inevitable, he said, but not to turn the United States into a literal battlefield or, God forbid, he said, into a killing field. So I think there's also a lesson there, for the international community that has reacted in saying that violence is not part of a democracy. We may disagree, but at the end of the day, someone will win. Where Trump has gained advantage, 60% predicted says, in the polls, but the dynamics may change, subsequently. After the Republican convention this week in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and after the Democrats try to pull themselves together.
Let's take a look now at some headlines across the world, looking at newspapers. We'll start with This Day. And This Day, much like many papers around the world today, have been hailing and, well, I was about to say hailing Nduka and Obaigbena. I'm sure that's definitely the case around the world, but also condemning what we've seen over the weekend in Pennsylvania in regards to the assassination attempt. But also at the very top of This Day, of course, President Tinubu has hailed Nduka Obaigbena at 65 and says he has demonstrated a passion for human development. And I think that's something that we can all agree with. Moving on then from This Day, let's take a look at the Punch. And Punch is looking at the Dangote refinery and about how there's been an update there. Essentially, shares in March, as what we're expecting is that Dangote refinery will list its shares in March and supply petrol in August. So that would be very interesting. Over the weekend, I know that a lot of journalists were on site at the Dangote refinery in Lagos. Oji was there. It'll be very interesting to see what she comes out with in terms of the content there, the conversation she was able to have. I do believe Bosun, our own Bosun Omofayo, was also in attendance, and he talked to him about the prospect of the Dangote refinery bringing in African crude rather than American ones. And we did hear Alhaji Aliko Dangote talk about, yes, they are in conversations with countries like Angola to bring their crude into his refinery. Going on through the Daily Independent now, and they're talking about the telecoms industry and how harsh environment for business, the barriers to entry into the industry itself have caused for many industry leaders to halt investments in the telecoms industry, and that just adds to the long list of industries which are suffering under this current economic climate. From the Daily Independent, let's take a look at The Guardian. The Guardian is looking at these 21 states who are rushing to hold elections, and that's as 489 local government areas face zero FAAC allocations, and that falls over from one of the biggest stories last week from the Supreme Court. To the Daily Trust now. The Daily Trust is looking at the Abuja-Kaduna road project 6 years later, which is still uncompleted, still incomplete, that project. And it does kind of make you sit up straight, because when we're discussing the implementation of all of these other road projects, it does beg the question of if this one hasn't been completed in 6 years, how much confidence do we have in other major road projects being completed in the allotted time frame? From the Daily Trust, let's take a look now at the Vanguard. And the Vanguard is looking at consumer spending. It says that it's down in Nigeria as Nigerians stay gloomy and hold on to their money during this cost of living crisis. From Nigerian papers now, let's take a look at African ones. The Daily Nation in Kenya are reporting that 2 more bodies have been found they've been fished out of a quarry, a dump site in Kenya, and police at this moment are theorizing reasons for that, whether or not these are isolated killings, whether or not this is an example of a serial killer on the loose. So it is very interesting to read that article and find out the latest with these bodies that are turning up across Kenya, because they have been the cause of resident protests there. And of course, you've got the picture of Donald Trump being rushed off stage too. The Citizen of South Africa, they are looking at non-performing municipalities, and they say that these areas will be shut down and have their positions re-elected for, because they have been underperforming. And this is rhetoric from the government and National Unity. They are also speaking with one voice, and where they say certain political areas where they're not performing, they agree that those areas should go up for re-election. And then lastly, to our international papers, we'll take a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph, and we've got a picture of Paul Jude Bellingham, head in hands. This is, of course, after England lost the final of the European, what do we call them, the Euros 2024 to Spain. Spain had scored first, and then England had equalised, and there was so much prospects and happiness, and then Spain scored again. So that's the front page of the Daily Telegraph. I believe we also have the UK Guardian, and that also shares its front page with looking at Trump, but of course the agony for England. My friends, I'm going to come over to you all for comment on these papers, but before we start that, because it's pressing on my heart, we have to talk about this football situation. And I said this last week. Do you all remember Glenn Hoddle?
Yeah.
Glenn Hoddle was a former England manager, right? I'm just going to take a second to tell you about Glenn Hoddle. Glenn Hoddle was in my recollection, one of the first people who were like the casualties of cancel culture. He had allegedly made some comments about disabled people, and as a result, the FA decided to remove him as England manager. It was a huge deal. His mother came on some form of an iteration of a morning show in the United Kingdom and said that if they do this to her son, they take his job from him, remove his title from him, that no son of the soil would lead England to victory. Now, let me remind you that in 2022, Gareth Southgate led England all the way to the Euro finals at home in Wembley. We all know what happened there. Last night again, Gareth Southgate, a son of the soil, led England to another final. Unfortunately, they lost. You heard what Glenn Hoddle's mother said. I don't know about you, but I know an Ikwe when I hear one. And I'm just thinking that perhaps England could be fighting a force bigger than football. So what I suggest Gareth Southgate should do on their way home, perhaps 40 days of like prayer and fasting. And then we'll take it to like that. Glenn Hoddle's mother has died. So it's better to meet Glenn Hoddle and perhaps a little issue there. But what are your thoughts?
It's not about begging England. When a team is not good enough, they're not good enough. England has never been good enough.
This is one of their better teams.
Even they are one of their best teams in recent time. They had the likes of them John Barnes in 1990. They had the likes of them Paul Gascoigne. They had the likes of them Chris Waddle, Gary Lineker. They have never also been good enough. In fact, if you compare that team and this team, I would say that Italian 90 team was way better. So they've never been good enough. So it's not a case of Ekpe or anything.
Are you sure?
Femi is not Ekpe.
I think
it plays
a role.
The time the son of the soul side, Alf Ramsey won the 66th World Cup with them, it was Ojoro they did. Let's call it what it is, pure and simple. What I want to talk about real quickly, I want to talk about, what's it called now? I mean, Femi, I've lost my train of thought.
There's been so many different papers. Perhaps you'll take a look at these ones. The trains, the incomplete roads.
You the floor. Maybe when I remember my train of thoughts.
So two things I want to talk about this morning. The 21 states racing to hold elections in 489. That's the Guardian newspaper, and kudos to them. They've done a really good investigation into that. To imagine that a state like Anambra has not conducted local government elections since 2014. These are the kind of challenges that we're facing, and they also name some of those states as well who haven't done elections since then, and saying that they're now scrambling because at the end of the day, the people most affected would be the grassroots people in the local council areas who would not receive services because allocations do not get to them. So hopefully they can rectify that and begin to hold elections and not totally, denigrate the local government and actually give them back the power. There've been a lot of conversations around, the Supreme Court judgment here and there, but I think this exposes the failings in that particular area. Then also in Kenya, you draw the similarity between the police in Kenya and other parts of Africa. The fact that there are still investigations, still speculation, still not yet concluded, but that some of those bodies that are found there were from protests and that the police might be complicit. So until we see the full reports of that people have gone missing, following the protests, and that what if that had happened as a way that the police were hiding that? So it's very messy, and I'm looking forward to the full investigation.
Definitely.
Well, 21 states, as part of the fallout of the Supreme Court judgment last week on local government autonomy, have gone to court. Adamawa, Delta, Jigawa, Kano, Katsina, some of the affected states, where caretaker committees have been appointed. Where they are going to the Supreme Court is an exercise in futility. You recall that, when we discussed this subject originally, I said, yes, it's very clear, the position of the Supreme Court on the question of the fact that the third tier of government should be democratically elected. Section 7 of the 1999 Constitution. That's what Section 7 states very clearly. So, and the Supreme Court, Emmanuel Agim, JSC, was saying that, look, the Supreme Court had taken this position before, and we're saying that the Constitution does not recognize caretaker committees. So if they go to the Supreme Court and they say they are going to the Supreme Court, they will get the same verdict. So what the Supreme Court has done in that regard of Section 7 is to simply say that governors do not have the right to coronate, to appoint local government councils. As for Section 162, there's a lot of controversy over that, and I had raised my suspicion last week when I commented on the subject. And you can see that there is a divergence of opinion as to the position of the Supreme Court on that particular matter. But as for Section 7, they can, after Supreme Court, it is God. Even if they go to God, the Nigerian Constitution remains as it is.
Okay. All right.
I want to talk about telecoms. I now remember. I want to talk about telecoms, but I yield the floor.
Investment in telecoms. All right. Well, thank you so much, Adefemi. Always good to see you.